Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you. I moved into the Pinecrest Villas retirement community a few months after I retired from teaching. This was supposed to be my quiet chapter of life, a sunny corner of the world to enjoy gardening, reading mysteries on the porch, and maybe tinker on a few long-delayed hobbies. The homes here are pleasant, each with neat front yards and well-kept shrubbery. At first glance, it all feels like a friendly neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors wave and nod as they pass in golf carts. I quickly learned that beneath the calm exterior, the Homeowners Association rules everything. The Pinecrest Villas HOA has a board of 5 individuals, and one of them, Gilda, seems to run the show with an iron fist. I couldn't help noticing her the moment I arrived. She's always poised in the clubhouse foyer or ambling up and down the street, clipboard in hand, checking off some invisible to-do list. Folks have a nickname for her, the Hawk, because of her habit of zeroing in on every minor detail. But in private, I've also heard her referred to as Karen, for the way she's always demanding to see the manager, so to speak. The trouble started when a shipment of wood arrived at my driveway. I've always loved woodworking. Back in my teaching days, I'd occasionally set up a makeshift workshop for the after-school club or help kids build small model boats. Now that I'm retired, I wanted to craft carved trinkets for an upcoming grandniece wedding. It's been on my bucket list for years, to craft a hope chest and a few smaller items, like carved key holders for relatives, all by hand. When those wood planks were delivered, Gilda was on me faster than I could unload a single board. She marched across the street, no greeting, no smile, and demanded to know if I was planning structural renovations without approval. I was caught off guard, standing there in my overalls, holding a piece of oak. I explained that I was just an amateur woodworker, no construction or remodeling, but she gave me a cold stare and started scribbling into her little notebook. "That's fine, as long as you're not operating a commercial enterprise," she sniffed. "We have rules here." She then rattled off a litany of Pinecrest Villas regulations. No signage or advertisement for businesses, no excessive noise from power tools after certain hours, no unauthorized gatherings in garages. My eyes were glazing over, but I tried to remain patient. It was my first real run-in with the infamous Gilda, and I chalked it up to a misunderstanding. I figured she was just being cautious about preserving the neighborhood's peace. But within days, I received a formal letter from the HOA, citing a complaint that I was improperly storing building materials in open view. The letter threatened me with potential fines if I didn't remove the wood planks from my carport area. I sighed and thought, fine, I'll keep them in the garage. No big deal. But when I went to move them, I found another friendly reminder wedged under my door. Apparently, I was also in violation of some obscure rule about no raw material storage on the premises for non-residential use. The text was borderline accusatory, hinting I was definitely up to something bigger than innocent woodworking. I tried to smooth things over. I hopped in my golf cart and cruised 2 streets over to see if I could speak to Gilda personally at her house. She answered with the same stiff posture and that unwavering HOA official expression. She said that the board had already discussed my situation in a preliminary session. "Someone saw large deliveries," she told me. "We can't allow small factories or commercial operations here. You signed the covenants." "I'm not running any factory," I laughed awkwardly, but my humor wasn't returned. "I'm just a retiree looking to keep a hobby. Isn't that the point of living in a community like this?" Her posture tightened. Not everyone is so honest about their intentions. We've had people try to skirt the rules to make money on the side. It's my duty to protect property values. I repeated that I only wanted to build a few gifts. No signs. No business. Just occasional sawdust in my garage, I said. To my surprise, she told me the board would want proper documentation of my usage of the wood. I couldn't tell if she was serious, but by the look in her eyes, she absolutely was. She recommended I fill out a special request form for non-standard occupancy usage of my garage. I didn't even know such a form existed. Reluctantly, I went to the clubhouse office to pick it up. The receptionist's eyes rolled when I explained what I needed. She told me Gilda insisted on these forms even for minor activities, like someone storing a set of leftover bricks or a small generator. She whispered that this was Gilda's pet project, cracking down on anything that might be perceived as a rule violation. I filed the form anyway, swallowing my pride. I answered bizarre questions like, do you anticipate having employees on site? And will you be using commercial vehicles? I signed, dated, and submitted. Meanwhile, I arranged the wood planks neatly in my garage, well out of view, and carried on. I thought that was the end of it. For a few weeks, everything seemed fine. I even got neighborly waves from a couple across the street, Louise and Buck, who admired the little carved plaques I'd made for their mailbox post in my previous neighborhood. We chatted briefly, and they assured me Pinecrest Villas was usually a pleasant place to live, but to watch out for Gilda if she gets fixated. Sure enough, the quiet didn't last. One morning, I was hauling an old lathe from the back of my truck into the garage when I noticed Gilda standing on the sidewalk with her phone out, snapping photos. She claimed she was just documenting potential hazards. I didn't argue, but something knotted in my stomach. This was turning into a bizarre cat-and-mouse game, and I had no idea why. A few days later, I discovered a new letter stuck in my mailbox. This time, it was more serious. It said there would be a hearing about my activities. The letter named a date, time, and indicated I should be prepared to address concerns raised by several residents who believed I was using my home as a base for unapproved business transactions. It was signed by the entire HOA board, Gilda's name proudly in the center. I felt my blood pressure rise. I was no cunning businessman. I was a retired teacher with a new hobby. But apparently, rumor was spreading that my workshop was some covert operation. I immediately guessed who was at the root of those rumors. No matter how ridiculous this was, I knew better than to ignore an HOA summons. I marked the date on my calendar and did my best to gather anything that could show I wasn't operating a commercial enterprise, receipts for the supplies that indicated personal quantities, even pictures of the half-finished hope chest I was carving. I planned to stay calm, keep my sense of humor, and trust that the board would come to see it was all a silly misunderstanding. Part of me believed this was just Gilda's overzealous nature, that once she saw the truth, she'd drop the matter. Yet a nagging doubt in my mind said, this woman thrives on confrontation. If she wants to make an example of me, I better be ready for a fight. I tried to find the silver lining, at least I'd get to see how the HOA functioned. And maybe meeting them face to face would prove I wasn't some suspicious figure looking to turn my garage into a sawmill. I arrived at the clubhouse early, hoping to calm my nerves by sitting for a moment in the garden outside. But Gilda was already there, at a long table in the lounge, flanked by two other board members, Cliff and Dolores, a married couple easily in their 70s, and a woman named Harriet, who rarely seemed to speak. Another seat was empty, presumably for a member who couldn't make it. The lounge looked like a meeting space from a small-town city council, with plastic folding chairs lined up facing the long table. About a dozen residents were scattered throughout the rows, quietly whispering to each other. My neighbor Louise gave me a supportive nod, which helped settle my nerves. The meeting kicked off with formalities, a reading of the minutes from last month's session about landscaping budgets and a holiday luncheon. Finally, Gilda addressed new business, alleged commercial activities at 144 Pinecrest Drive. My address. She handed out copies of a typed statement. We've received complaints that Mr. Horner, a new resident, is engaged in repeated deliveries and possible sales of woodcraft items from his home. I raised my hand politely. I'd like to address this directly. My name is Walter Horner, I'm a retired school teacher, and everything I do is purely for personal or family use. The deliveries were from a craft supplier, nothing more. Dolores leaned forward with a gentle smile. And you have no intention of selling these wood pieces? None at all. My niece is getting married. I'm building a hope chest and a few small gifts. Gilda's face remained rigid. Then why do you have a lathe? That suggests production. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I like to use a lathe for detailed wood turning, table legs, ornate edges, that kind of thing. It's just a hobby. You can see some of my pieces if you want. I held up a few photos. They passed my pictures around. Dolores's eyes lit up admiring the craftsmanship, and Cliff nodded approvingly. Harriet barely glanced at them, while Gilda examined the photos with the same caution one would use inspecting counterfeit money. Well, the board must determine if you're violating any bylaws, Gilda said sharply. If you are manufacturing goods for sale or profit, that's against our covenants. If you're hosting employees or customers, that's also a violation. Do you realize the potential traffic that could generate on our quiet streets? I almost laughed at the word employees, but I managed to hold it in. There's no traffic. The only vehicles in my driveway belong to me, or occasionally my friend who helps me lift heavy boards. I'm not selling anything. The other board members seemed somewhat swayed by my explanation. They asked a few more questions, then Dolores motioned to drop the complaint if I agreed to store my materials neatly and keep noise levels low. But Gilda wasn't finished. She stood up, stared down at me, and declared she had additional evidence to present. From a manila folder, she produced photographs of me loading my truck with boxes. I recognized them as the shipping boxes I used to mail off small keepsakes to relatives in other states. She slapped them onto the table as though they were scandalous evidence. You see? His packaging items in large quantities. This goes beyond personal crafts. My mouth dropped open. That's for my family, my sister in Michigan, my nephew in Oregon. I assure you, no money has changed hands. She glared at me. I have a sworn statement from a neighbor that packages are going out every week. That volume is suspicious. People are worried about an unregulated enterprise. I glanced at the crowd. A few residents shifted uncomfortably. Was someone genuinely worried, or just fueling Gilda's crusade? My stomach turned. I realized how quickly rumors can spiral. Dolores raised an eyebrow at Gilda. Let's not jump to conclusions. He has family out of state. Shipping gifts isn't necessarily a violation. For a moment, it felt like reason might prevail. Then Harriet, who had barely spoken, cleared her throat. I overheard him telling someone he might do a local fair or craft show. If he's building an inventory to sell at a fair, that's business activity. I hesitated, remembering a casual conversation at the mailbox. Someone asked if I ever sold my crafts at local fairs, and I said, I'd consider it one day for charity. That was months ago, before I even moved here. Gilda seized the moment. So you admit you're considering selling your items. That's a direct violation. I tried to stay calm. This is a misunderstanding. I said one day, maybe. But right now, there is no business. I can show you all my financial statements if it puts your mind at ease. There's zero income from woodcraft. After more back and forth, Cliff scratched his head, muttering that it was a lot of fuss over a hobby. But Gilda insisted on a formal vote. Cliff and Dolores voted to dismiss the complaint under the condition that I store my supplies appropriately and keep any packaging discreet. Harriet, swayed by Gilda, abstained. Gilda herself voted against dismissal. The vote stood at 2-1 with 1 abstention, so the complaint was officially dropped, for the moment. I let out a quiet sigh of relief. I thanked the board and turned to leave, but Gilda's voice sliced through the tense air. I'll be keeping an eye on you, Mr. Horner. If there is any sign of unregistered activity, we will reopen the case. Be sure of that. I thought that was the end. After all, the board had spoken. But outside, as I was getting into my car, I saw 2 police cruisers rolling slowly down the street toward my house. My heart skipped a beat. They passed me without stopping, but I recognized the lead officer. He'd come to the clubhouse last month to talk about neighborhood watch programs. Minutes later, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw those same cruisers parked by the curb, lights off. 2 officers were standing with Gilda on my front lawn. She waved them over to me. Mr. Horner, one officer said politely, we have a report that you might be storing hazardous materials or operating heavy machinery without proper ventilation. I stared in disbelief, my heart pounding. Hazardous materials? It's wood, for heaven's sake. Gilda looked smug. Chemicals, maybe. We have to be sure. The officers seemed confused by the entire situation. I walked them into my garage, flicked on the light, and showed them my tidy stacks of pine and oak, my lathe, and my handheld carving tools. No chemicals, no giant machines, just a small workshop. They took a quick look around and apologized for the inconvenience. Then they left, presumably realizing it was a baseless claim. Gilda shot me a final glare as she walked off after them. I felt a chill run through me. If she was willing to file bogus police complaints, who knew what she'd try next? Exhausted, I locked up my garage. My phone buzzed. Louise had sent me a message, "Saw the police outside your house. Everything okay? Let me know if you need a witness, this is ridiculous." I texted back a short reply, "Yes, it's ridiculous. Thanks for your support." But deep down, I was rattled. The HOA hearing had ended, and yet Gilda had escalated things the very same afternoon. I began to wonder if there was something else fueling her obsession. If it was just about me, or if I was caught in some bigger power play within the HOA. Either way, I could sense this wasn't over. I was determined to stay on the right side of the rules, whatever those rules were. Things quieted down for a couple of weeks. No more formal complaints, no surprise visits from the police. I kept my workshop activities limited to daytime hours, and I even started parking my truck inside the garage to avoid gossip. Yet I noticed Gilda's little silver sedan slowly circling my cul-de-sac every so often. The rumor mill churned away. Friends told me she was collecting evidence that I'd resume shipping out large boxes. I thought it was only a matter of time before she tried something else. What I didn't expect was a direct confrontation at the next HOA social event, where half the neighborhood would be present. It was a Tuesday afternoon potluck in the clubhouse, a monthly get-together for residents to share dishes and chat about upcoming community plans. I had no intention of going at first, but Louise urged me to attend. "Show them you're a friendly neighbor," she said. "The more people see you're just a regular guy, the less fuel Gilda has for her nonsense." I took her advice. I brought my signature deviled eggs and tried to mingle. Several folks welcomed me warmly, complimenting the eggs, but I could sense the tension. Some folks had obviously heard Gilda's take on me, that I was a shady woodworker who might be ignoring the rules. It was like there were invisible lines in the room, some folks standing on Team Gilda, others standing away, or eyeing me cautiously. A short while into the event, Gilda took the mic to make announcements. She reminded everyone about the upcoming dues deadline, the spring garden competition, and then she dropped something unexpected. "Also, I want to let residents know that we are taking a tougher stance on unapproved commerce in our community. Anyone who suspects a neighbor of violating these rules should file a formal report." I felt my blood boil. She was clearly baiting people, trying to turn them into watchful informants. Most folks looked confused, but a handful seemed to nod in approval. Louise, beside me, whispered, "Stay calm." I tried. But then Gilda directly locked eyes with me. "Mr. Horner, since you're here, I do hope you're not shipping anything out today," she said in a sweet yet sinister tone. I let out a slow breath. "Only shipping leftover deviled eggs, Gilda. If that's allowed." A few people chuckled nervously. Her face hardened, but she moved on quickly to other announcements. It felt like a small victory that I hadn't taken her bait. Still, after the event ended, she cornered me near the punch bowl with that chilly glare. "Your charade will end, Horner. If you try to skirt the HOA's guidelines again, I won't hesitate to have you brought up on serious legal charges." My patience evaporated. "You already called the police over nothing. If you persist, I may have to consider my own legal options." She snorted. "Good luck with that." Then she stormed off, leaving me flustered and angry. I truly hoped it was just another one of her empty threats, until the next morning, when I received a notice in my mailbox summoning me to county court for a restraining order hearing. Gilda claimed that I'd been harassing her by invading her privacy and stalking. My jaw dropped. In all my days, I'd never been accused of such a thing. I called the county clerk's office to verify. Sure enough, there was a formal filing. My presence was required. I felt a burst of indignation. She was twisting the narrative to paint me as a threat. I phoned Louise, who was equally stunned. "She's flipped the script on you," Louise said. "But you have plenty of witnesses. Nobody's seen you do anything like what she's alleging. This is insane." I spent the next couple of days gathering all the evidence I could, statements from neighbors, notes on when Gilda had shown up outside my home, the police record that showed she was the one calling them, not me. I even had phone camera footage from Louise, showing Gilda's car lurking around my house at odd hours. The court date arrived, and I found myself in a crowded county courthouse with Louise and Buck, who came along to support me. Gilda stood across the aisle in a neat blue suit, looking the picture of neighborly concern. She claimed I had repeatedly driven by her house at night, trespassed on her property, and left threatening notes. I felt physically ill hearing her lies. When the judge asked for evidence, Gilda couldn't produce a single note or photograph. She only had her word. Then my turn came. I presented my timeline, my neighbor's written statements, and the short video clip of Gilda's car parked outside my home late at night. I also showed how she had filed multiple complaints against me, including an unfounded police report. I explained calmly that I had no desire to approach her property. On the contrary, she kept coming to mine. The judge's brow furrowed as he scanned the documents. Finally, in a steady voice, he told Gilda, "I see no basis here for a restraining order. Your allegations are not supported by evidence." She tried to argue, but the judge cut her off. "If anything, it appears you've been the initiator of contact. I'm dismissing this case." Relief flooded through me, and I thanked the judge quietly. Gilda stared daggers at me on her way out, but she said nothing. My friends and I lingered a moment, stunned and grateful. I thought the worst was over. Yet what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. Right in the courthouse parking lot, Gilda whipped out her phone to make a call, pacing aggressively between parked cars. Suddenly, 2 uniformed police officers approached her. She began ranting that I was dangerous and that the judge got it all wrong. The officers seemed confused, and one repeatedly asked her to calm down. The last thing I saw, as Louise and I walked to my car, was Gilda's voice escalating into a shriek. "He's going to ruin this community. He's using that workshop for something illegal. I want him arrested." One of the officers motioned for her to step aside and appear to speak more calmly, but she wouldn't. A minute later, they were escorting her away, presumably to calm her down or possibly to charge her with disturbing the peace. I didn't stick around to find out. Louise, sitting in my passenger seat, shook her head as we pulled away. "She's lost it, Walter. This is no longer about some silly HOA rule. She's on a personal crusade to destroy you." Back home, news traveled fast. Neighbors approached me, wide-eyed, wanting to know why police had taken Gilda aside outside the courthouse. I explained what happened. Some people looked shocked, others took it in stride. Turns out Gilda had a history of conflict with previous residents, though never to this extent. A day later, I got a polite knock on my door from Cliff, the longtime board member. He apologized profusely for Gilda's behavior, explaining that the board had never endorsed her legal actions. "She went rogue," he said. "The rest of us never even knew she was taking you to court. Then she filed a false statement with the HOA about you. We've decided to remove her from her position." I felt a rush of relief hearing that. It meant the board finally saw how unhinged she'd become. "She got so obsessed," Cliff sighed. "It's like she convinced herself you were a criminal. I'm sorry we didn't put a stop to this sooner." Within the week, the HOA circulated an official letter announcing Gilda's resignation. They wrote that she had stepped down for personal reasons, but everyone knew the real story. Neighbors started coming over with homemade casseroles and desserts, telling me they were relieved the fiasco was finally ending. Even Harriet, who had once been aligned with Gilda, sent a regretful card saying she'd been misled by Gilda's tall tales. As for Gilda, I heard through the grapevine that after her meltdown outside the courthouse, she was advised to move out to avoid further legal consequences. No one seemed to know exactly where she went, only that her house went on the market. A new HOA president was appointed, Dolores, and the entire atmosphere of Pinecrest Villas changed. People acted friendlier. You could feel the collective sigh of relief. I've kept my lathe and carving tools. I still ship the occasional gift to family. Neighbors drop by and sometimes ask me to carve a monogram or design a wooden plaque. And the best part is, no one's calling the police about hazardous materials anymore. Months later, I'm sure the memory of this fiasco will fade into the legend of Pinecrest Villas lore. Remember that time Gilda tried to take Walt to court over wood? But for me, it was a life lesson on how far a person's paranoia can go when they have just enough power to wield it irresponsibly. These days, I focus on enjoying my retirement, forging genuine friendships, and occasionally hosting small woodcarving lessons for some of the neighbors. When we gather around the workbench, I like to joke that if Gilda saw us, she'd call us organized criminals, or something equally absurd. We share a laugh, but it's a reminder that real-life drama can spiral faster than any fictional story. All told, I don't regret moving here. Most of the residents are wonderful. The experience just showed me that, no matter where you go, there's bound to be at least one Karen on a mission. The difference is how the rest of the community, and sometimes the law, responds. In the end, reason won out. I still get a little shiver remembering Gilda's wild accusations, but I'm proud I stood my ground. And if this saga taught me anything, it's that no hobby, however innocent, is safe from the scrutiny of someone determined to see evil where it doesn't exist.